She tried to discredit him live on TV. His response changed everything. The email arrived late in the afternoon, a short formal message from the producers of The Morning Exchange, one of the country's most watched talk shows. They wanted Darius Bell, tech entrepreneur and CEO of Innovis, to be a guest on their segment about diversity in business. Darius had seen this game before, a mainstream platform suddenly remembering that black entrepreneurs exist, showcasing them for a few minutes of applause before moving on to the next trending topic. But this time was different. Innovis wasn't just any startup. They had recently won a multi-million-dollar defense contract, beating out some of the biggest names in the industry. That wasn't luck. It was 2 decades of relentless work. Even so, he hesitated before accepting. Something didn't feel right. His assistant, Tasha, noticed the hesitation. "Are you sure you want to do this? You know how these shows are. They love a success story, but they love to tear one down even more." Darius leaned back in his chair. "I can handle it, Tasha. Besides, it's national exposure. Let's see what they have to say." She sighed and shook her head. "Just don't let them provoke you." He nodded, though he knew he was about to play a game they didn't understand. If this interview was a trap, they were playing chess with the wrong man. On the morning of the interview, Darius arrived at the KXNT studios in Los Angeles. The air in the waiting room was cold and sterile. A young producer greeted him, eyes glued to her clipboard. "Mr. Bell, thank you for being here. We'll get you on mic in 5 minutes." No friendly chat, no warm-up, just a swift transaction. As he sat in the makeup chair, an assistant prepped him with indifferent precision. The monitor on the wall showed the live broadcast. The celebrity gossip segment was on air, followed by a cooking demonstration, then the transition. Coming up, the black tech boom, talent or preferential treatment. Darius gritted his teeth. So that was the angle. If they thought they had the upper hand, they were about to be surprised. But he didn't know how far they were willing to go. The Morning Exchange set was designed to appear welcoming, soft blues and golds, a glass table between the host and guest chairs. Cameras hovered like silent observers, capturing every movement, every expression. Darius adjusted his jacket and sat opposite Madeleine Royce, the show's lead anchor, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for asking tough questions. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Darius Bell," she began, her voice smooth and rehearsed, "CEO of Innovis, a true American success story." Darius gave a polite nod. "Thank you for having me." She leaned in slightly, flipping through her cue cards. "Let's cut to the chase. Your company recently secured a $200 million government contract, beating out some of the biggest names in tech. That's impressive." Darius knew how the game worked. First, the praise, trying to make it seem like they respected his achievements. He answered measuredly. "It was a long process, but yes, we worked hard. We developed a security encryption system that outperformed our competitors. Simple as that." Madeleine crossed her legs and paused subtly. "Some have called it groundbreaking," she said before continuing. "But others have raised questions." Darius didn't flinch. "Questions?" Madeleine picked up a card and read aloud. Some industry experts say Innovis benefited from certain federal diversity incentives, that companies like his have an advantage on these contracts because agencies are looking to diversify their suppliers. It may not have just been about being the best, but about meeting a quota. There it was, the real reason he was there. Darius let a silence hang before replying. I've heard that argument before, but it's funny. When a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when a legacy company, run by the same families for generations, lands the same contracts, nobody questions it. The air in the studio shifted. Producers behind the cameras exchanged glances. Madeline remained composed. So you're saying race played no part in your success? Darius chuckled, shaking his head. Let me ask you something, Madeline. When SpaceX won NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met some diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos landed government contracts for Blue Origin, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask this question when the CEO is the color of my skin? Madeline's expression barely flickered. So, you don't believe these diversity programs help? Darius clasped his hands. They help level the playing field, but what people don't realize is the field was never level in the first place. Madeline wasn't finished yet. She had another card up her sleeve. Her smile sharpened like a hidden blade in silk. She glanced at her cards, then back at Darius. Let's talk about this playing field you mentioned. Her voice shifted from polite curiosity to something colder. You grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, with a single mother attending public school, working hard to pull yourself out of a difficult situation. That's inspiring. Darius nodded slowly, sensing where she was going. But here's what some might wonder. How does someone with no Ivy League background, no deep family connections, rise from an impoverished neighborhood to secure contracts that billion-dollar corporations can't? She let the question hang in the air, the implication clear. How did he get there? Had someone pulled strings? Darius tilted his head slightly as if considering her words carefully. It's called hard work, Madeline. Some of us don't have generational wealth or golf club networks to rely on, so we build from the ground up. Madeline gave a small nod, as if listening, but not really listening. But surely you had help along the way, she pressed. Perhaps a mentor, a program, something that gave that extra push. Darius exhaled silently. Help? The help came in the form of working 3 jobs while getting my engineering degree. The help came in the form of sleeping in my office while developing my first software prototype because I couldn't afford rent. That was the help I had. The producers behind the cameras were in rapt attention now. Madeline continued, shuffling her cards. And yet some would argue that black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. That programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and government incentives exist specifically to open doors that were once closed. Darius leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. You know what's funny? When a black entrepreneur succeeds, they always ask what programs helped us, but nobody asks which old money bank helped fund a white startup. Nobody asks what family connections ensured he got into Stanford or which golfing buddy invested in his company. He let the words settle for a moment. The truth is, Success isn't a lottery. People like me had to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table. The tension in the room was palpable. Madeline, however, didn't blink. She smiled in the manner of someone who thinks they've just cornered their opponent. "That's an interesting perspective," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "But let's address another factor: perception." She turned slightly to the cameras. "Darius, you present yourself as a self-made success. But let's talk about the public perception of your story. Some would argue that black entrepreneurs have an unfair advantage when it comes to media attention, that the underdog narrative is more marketable than the stories of thousands of white entrepreneurs who work just as hard but don't receive the same spotlight." Darius let out a low chuckle. "So, now we're getting too much attention." Madeline maintained her polished smile, but a slight shift in her posture gave her away. She hadn't expected him to laugh. "Are you telling me that in a world where 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where tech funding still overwhelmingly goes to white startups, the real problem is that people like me are getting too much attention?" Madeline tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm simply pointing out that in the current climate, some people feel there's a pressure to highlight diversity at the expense of pure merit." Darius exhaled, shaking his head. "Merit, eh?" He glanced quickly at the cameras and then returned his gaze to her. "Let me ask you something, Madeline. Do you really think that if I weren't exceptional at what I do, I'd be sitting here right now?" Madeline's mouth opened slightly, but before she could respond, Darius continued. "Do you think I got here because I played the diversity card, or do you think I got here despite everything that was done to keep me out?" The silence in the room was louder than any of her previous questions, but Madeline wasn't finished. Not yet. She had one final card to play, the card she hoped would break him. She took a deep breath, subtly shifting her posture as if casually, but Darius noticed. He looked at his notes once more, setting them aside. "Darius," she said, tilting her head slightly, "I think it's fair to say you're passionate about this, and I respect that, but let me ask you something." Darius gave a small nod, waiting. "Do you think all this outrage is overblown?" She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "After all, your success story proves the system isn't as hostile to black entrepreneurs as some claim." The audacity of the question was palpable. Darius could feel the heat rising in his spine, but he didn't let it show. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You know," he said, his voice measured, "it's funny how people love to use one success story as proof that the problem doesn't exist." Madeline's smile remained, but something in her eyes flickered. Darius leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Let me put it this way. If one person escapes a burning building, do you look at them and say, 'See, the fire wasn't that bad'?" Madeline opened her mouth, hesitated, and closed it again. Darius didn't finish. "The fact that I succeeded doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I fought twice as hard to get through it." He let his words hang, and even the production crew stopped moving. Madeline adjusted in her chair, searching for a controlled response. "I understand your perspective, but let's talk about the other side of this." She turned slightly to the cameras, adopting that carefully neutral tone of someone attempting damage control. Some would argue your frustration isn't about race. They think it's about resentment towards large corporations. After all, you publicly criticize tech companies for not hiring more diverse executives. Darius tilted his head. Resentment? No, Madeline. Accountability, absolutely. Madeline pursed her lips for a moment, then said, "And what would you say to those who believe that in today's economy, success is down to hard work, not race?" Darius exhaled through his teeth, then fixed his eyes on her. "This is the moment," he said. "People love to believe in fairy tales when they're the ones benefiting from them." Madeline opened her mouth to speak, but Darius didn't let her. He continued, "Let's be realistic. Black entrepreneurs still have their loan applications rejected twice as often as white ones. We receive less than 2% of venture capital, and even when we prove our worth, we're still asked if we deserve our success." Madeline fell silent. Darius leaned back in his chair, adjusting his watch. He let the sentence hang in the studio air, then leaned forward again. "You wanted to talk about fairness. So let's start by telling the truth. Pure silence." But this silence was different. It wasn't discomfort, it was impact. Madeline's expression shifted. Now, it wasn't just the audience watching Darius. It was the entire country. Looking directly into the camera, he said, "I know what some of you are thinking right now." He paused, staring directly down the lens. "Some of you are nodding because you've lived this, because you've seen this. Others are arms crossed, frowning, telling yourselves this isn't real, that I'm playing the victim, that it's all in my head. But deep down, you know I'm right." The room remained silent. Nobody moved. And then the producer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Okay, we need a quick break." Madeline forced a polite smile. "We'll be right back after the break." The cameras cut, but the damage was done. Within the hour, clips of the exchange were everywhere. But the real storm was only just beginning. The clip went viral on social media like a wrecking ball. When Darius got into his car, his phone was exploding with messages, missed calls, notifications flooding his screen. Twitter was ablaze. Darius Bell just exposed media bias live on TV. That was powerful. Dire truth hurts. The way he looked into the camera and confronted America, chills. Darius Bell was right, but not everyone saw it that way. "Here we go again," someone wrote. "Another successful guy playing the oppression card. Stop with the victim mentality." Others said, "This guy proved why people don't like hiring activists. Play the race card all you want, but hard work speaks louder. Merit matters." Cable news picked up on it quickly. Some called him courageous, others called him angry and combative. At lunchtime, Morning Exchange released a carefully worded statement. "We value open dialogue and diverse perspectives." While today's discussion escalated beyond what was anticipated, we remain committed to fair conversations. Darius chuckled as he read it. Fair, of course. His assistant Tasha called him, half laughing, half exasperated. "You realize you just set the internet on fire, right?" Darius rubbed his temples. "That wasn't exactly the plan." "Good job. You've become America's most talked about entrepreneur," she replied. He didn't respond. He knew what was coming next. Viral moments aren't just moments. They become battlegrounds, and the next 48 hours were going to be a mess. But this wasn't just about him. The following morning, the story exploded beyond social media. TV anchors debated the issue live. Op-eds flooded publications. Everyone had an angle. Is Darius Bell the new face of corporate law? Fox News asked. Darius Bell, viral moment challenges American meritocracy, CNN declared. What Darius Bell's interview reveals about race and success in America, Business Insider highlighted. Meanwhile, Madeleine Royce was attempting damage control. The following morning, she gave a carefully rehearsed response on her show. I respect Mr. Bell and his achievements, but I stand by my questions. My job as a journalist is to ask what the public is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, it only proves how necessary they were. She wasn't backing down. Darius read that from his office, shaking his head. Tasha sat opposite him, scrolling through emails. We've just had a flood of new investors interested, she said. Darius offered a wry smile. Let me guess. The same ones who ignored us last year? Tasha shrugged. Seems being controversial is good for business. But it wasn't all positive. Some clients had pulled out. A major corporate partner was reassessing its commitments. And then there were the death threats. Emails, calls, even an anonymous package left at Innovis HQ. Inside, just a single sheet of paper with one word written in bold, enough. Tasha read the message with a grim expression. You need security, she said. Darius sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew this was coming. Whenever a black man speaks with such unapologetic boldness, the price always comes. But backing down was never an option, and now he had a decision to make. Would he let the backlash silence him, or would this be the start of something bigger? Darius sat in his office, gazing at the skyline through the panoramic window. The past 72 hours had been a roller coaster. Praise, backlash, threats, opportunities. He thought of his younger self, the boy from Birmingham, Alabama, who had to fight for every ounce of success. The boy who saw doors slammed in his face while others simply walked through without knocking. And now he was at the center of a national debate, something he never sought but couldn't ignore. The storm was only just beginning, and the weight of being a public figure would never be the same. Tasha entered his office with an unreadable expression. She placed a folder on the desk in front of Darius. We've received a proposal, she said. Darius looked at the folder, his mind still distant. From who? He asked, not really expecting a specific answer. From a network, Tasha replied, gesturing to the document. They want you to do a live broadcast special, an in-depth interview about race, business, and the system. Darius stared at the folder for a moment, as if the words on it made no sense. He let out a sigh and leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. He knew this was a pivotal moment, the kind of opportunity that could reshape the narrative, but also ruin his image if not carefully managed. Now they want to listen, he muttered to himself, more than to Tasha. They didn't want me when we were struggling. Now that I'm at the center of the conversation, they want to use me. Tasha crossed her arms and looked at him, waiting for his decision. What are you going to do? He looked out at the horizon again, at the city sprawling below. Down there, the streets of Los Angeles seemed a world away. The life, the rhythm, the problems felt otherworldly. But he was here, at the top, in the spotlight, and he felt the weight of it. "Tell them I accept," he said firmly, "but on my terms." Tasha looked surprised, but he continued, "If the system is going to put me in the spotlight, I'm going to control the narrative. I'm going to say what no one else dares to." She nodded, knowing this was the kind of decision that would change everything. Darius was determined not to let the moment slip away. This was his chance to make a mark, to finally open many people's eyes to the realities he and others like him faced. The idea of being manipulated by the media, of being shaped by how others perceived him, was not something he was willing to accept. He'd been through too much to let himself be trapped again. The following morning, Darius sat in the recording studio, the camera pointed directly at him. He felt the tension in the air, the weight of every word he was about to say. The program's host, a well-known journalist, tried to appear sympathetic, but Darius knew the game. He knew that everything here would be analyzed, distorted, used to please the audience. He knew that ultimately the media was interested in a good story, not the truth. The host attempted to start with some gentle questions, trying to make Darius feel comfortable. But Darius wasn't there to please. He'd done that throughout his entire career. He wanted something more. He wanted people to truly listen. When the host asked the first question about the challenges he faced building Innovis, Darius didn't hesitate. He answered directly and clearly, highlighting the difficulties, the obstacles he'd had to overcome, but also the resilience and strength that had kept him going. He knew this was the moment to expose the power play and prejudice that black entrepreneurs like himself had to navigate. "You've mentioned that you didn't have the advantage of coming from a wealthy family, of having influential connections," said the host, attempting to pull at the emotional strings. "But many argue that government assistance and diversity initiatives are fundamental to your success. What are your thoughts on that?" Darius didn't delay his response. "That narrative is convenient for those who don't want to admit the system is broken," he said, without raising his voice, but with an intensity that was beginning to show. They prefer to believe that a black man's success is always a fluke, an act of charity. They can't imagine that people like me are able to reach where I've reached because we've worked 10 times harder than others, because at every step I've taken there's been a door slammed in my face. I'm not an isolated case. I'm a reflection of a system that favors those who already have everything." The host tried to shift the focus to another question, something softer, more comfortable. But Darius wasn't willing to let the conversation derail. He knew people needed to hear this, that the audience needed to see what had been ignored for decades. And at the same time, he knew this stance would make him a target. He was already used to the attacks, the threats, but he no longer cared. His mission was more important now. "The issue isn't about diversity programs," he continued. "It's about real equity, something that has never existed in this country. They say everyone has the same chances, but that's a lie. Look at the numbers. Look at the companies, the universities, the job market. How many of us do we see in positions of power? How many of us see ourselves truly heard when we're fighting for a chance? It's not about quotas. It's about ensuring everyone can have a fair chance, without the color of your skin, your surname, or the neighborhood you were born in determining your worth. The host, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to interrupt. But Darius, some people would say you're playing the victim card, that the success of someone like you is an exception. What would you say to those people? Darius looked directly into the camera. I'd tell them that for every one of us who manages to do this, there are thousands who can't. For every one of us who survives the system, there are thousands of voices that are never heard. You want to talk about exceptions? Then show me the exceptions who are winning. Show me the black men and women who are treated the same as white people. Show me the equity they promise us that never arrives. The tension in the room was palpable. He knew his words were being processed, analyzed, but he also knew they were stirring something far bigger than any of the issues the moderator was trying to raise. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for all those who had never had the chance to be heard. You talk a lot about the system and the inequalities it creates, the moderator tried again. But some people believe that today, more than ever, opportunities are there for those with the grit to fight for them. That success is simply a matter of hard work. Darius didn't hesitate. Those people are in denial. Hard work has never been enough for a black man, and believe me, they know it. If they didn't know it, they wouldn't be questioning every victory, every step we take, because they know we're not equal. We don't have the same opportunities, and deep down, they're scared of that. They're scared of seeing the truth because that would require them to see what the system has done. And I'm not going to apologize for putting that on the table. The interview continued for a few more minutes, but nothing said, from that point onwards, had the same impact. Darius had put everything on the line, and he knew the impact of his words would spread far beyond that studio. When the recording finally ended, he stood up and, without saying a word, left the premises. He didn't need to do anything else. The words had been spoken, and the conversation was far from over. That night, as he watched the news and read the reactions on social media, he knew his path would never be the same. The world was listening now, and most importantly, he had done something very few would dare to do. He had challenged the system and won, at least for that day. Now he was ready to face the consequences, because deep down, he knew there was no turning back. The fight was only just beginning, and he was more prepared than ever to continue. What had started as a simple interview would become the catalyst for a revolution of ideas, and Darius Bell would be remembered as the man who wasn't afraid to fight against the tide. And as that happened, he knew the real battle was still to come. Night fell over Los Angeles, and Darius sat in his office, the city lights illuminating the landscape. He could feel the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, but at the same time, there was a sense of calm. The weight of the decisions he had made seemed to have lessened, but he knew the impact of that interview would reverberate for a long time. His mind couldn't quite rest. What he had just done was something far bigger than any business victory. He knew it. He felt it in every fiber of his being. It wasn't just about winning a multi-million-dollar contract. or being the CEO of an innovative company. What he was doing was giving voice to a reality that had been ignored for too long. What he was doing was changing the narrative, and that change would come at a cost. The phone on his desk vibrated, and he quickly picked it up. It was a message from Tasha. "I saw what you did today. The world is talking about it. You're the most talked about person in the country right now." Darius read the message, but didn't reply immediately. He knew the conversation was far from over. He knew the next few days would be intense. He could feel the wind of a coming revolution, but he also knew it meant he'd be at the eye of the storm. The following morning, the media were out in force on the streets of Los Angeles. Every broadcaster, every reporter was trying to glean something more from his story, trying to understand how he, a black man from a deprived neighborhood, had reached this point. The focus was no longer solely on Innovis or the contract he'd secured. Now the conversation centered on him, his story, his stance, his struggle. He knew the media weren't interested in a genuine conversation about inequality or the systemic issues at play. They wanted a ready-made story, a palatable narrative to sell. But Darius wasn't there to follow the script. He was there to rewrite it. Tasha entered his office, that serious look on her face once more. She sat opposite his desk, her hands clasped around a stack of papers. "Have you seen the comments?" she asked. "The social media reaction, the news coverage. It's not just debate, Darius. It's pure polarization. Some are calling you a hero, others a villain. It's like you've split the nation in two." Darius took a deep breath, nodding. "I knew this would happen. Truth is never readily accepted. People need time to process it, and in the meantime, they'll cling to their preconceived notions." He paused, gazing out at the horizon again. "But that's good, Tasha. It means the conversation has truly begun. And it's this conversation that needs to happen. If anyone had any doubts about the stakes, they now know the system isn't fair. It isn't equal for everyone." Tasha looked hesitant. "But, Darius, have you seen the attacks? They're coming from all sides. People trying to discredit your story. People saying you're just trying to play the victim. The threats haven't stopped either. They're attacking you for being, well, you." Darius stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city's movement seemed innocuous, but he knew the battle was far from won. "I've lived this before, Tasha. I've seen this happen my whole life. Whenever you achieve something, whenever you challenge the status quo, people try to bring you down. They always try to make you feel small, insignificant. But I'm not that boy from Birmingham anymore. I'm not the guy who just reacted. I'm the guy who controls the narrative now. I won't let this fight be in vain." The truth was, as he spoke, he knew the pressure was starting to weigh on him. He still remembered his early days at Innovis, when everything felt so uncertain, when he had to pull miracles just to survive in the marketplace. He recalled the days when systemic racism prevented him from doing business with major corporations, when he was constantly disregarded, ignored, or even undervalued. But he also remembered the victories, the small wins that, added together, had brought him here. Each one was proof that he had what it took, that he wasn't here by chance. And this moment, the moment he was living now, was just another one of those victories, one with far more effort than anyone else's. The notion that his success was down to special assistance or diversity programs was a fallacy that infuriated him. He knew it wasn't about that. He knew he'd worked harder than anyone to get where he was. He knew that for every one of us who managed to break a barrier, there were thousands still fighting to be seen and heard, and he was prepared to be the voice of those thousands. "I just don't understand," Tasha said, breaking the silence. "Why won't they listen to the truth? Why do most people fail to see what's really happening?" Darius turned to her, his expression serious but resolute. "They don't want to hear, Tasha, because the truth makes them uncomfortable. The truth demands they see the system for what it really is. They don't want to see that, because when we see the truth, we have to do something about it. And that's hard. People prefer to live in a lie, where everyone has the same opportunities, where merit is the only criterion. The truth is that merit isn't enough when you're already starting behind." "So what happens now?" Tasha asked, her tone softer, but still worried about the future. "Now, we move forward," Darius replied, a small but firm smile playing on his lips. "Now, it's time to continue the work. Innovis will grow even further, and I will use this platform to do what I've always done: open doors for others, break down barriers, and show that success isn't a matter of luck or a diversity quota. It's about being good at what you do, regardless of where you come from." In the following weeks, Darius found himself at the center of a battle he never asked for. His life was on constant display, with his every word analyzed, twisted, interpreted in ways he never imagined. He knew that while he remained at the heart of this conversation, he would be a target for attacks, but he also knew he was fulfilling a role far greater than himself. He was becoming a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. He was forcing people to look at the system and see what was wrong. The threats continued, but Darius didn't back down. The pressure mounted, but he stood firm. He knew that behind every threat lay a deep-seated fear of change, a fear that things might finally begin to shift. But he also knew that resistance wouldn't come without a price. "Have you seen the numbers?" Tasha asked one evening, looking at her computer screen as she reviewed emails and messages. "Investors are seeking you out more than ever. Major corporations want to work with you. You're changing everything." Darius smiled, though it was a weary smile. "Yes, I have. But it's not just about the money, Tasha. It never was. It's about showing that it's possible, that anyone can do this, no matter their color, their background, or their social class. They tried to silence me, but I only amplified my voice. And now we can't stop. We're just getting started." He leaned back in his chair, gazing at the computer screen. The messages of support were overwhelming, but so were the messages of hate. Some called him a hero, others a troublemaker. But Darius knew what he was doing. He wasn't fighting for himself, but for all the others who were still invisible, those who fought daily without even a chance. He was breaking the chains, one conversation at a time. He still had much to do. The battle was far from won. But for the first time, he felt he was on the right path. Now he was ready to take this conversation to the next level. The game had changed, and he was determined to be the leader of this change, not to be celebrated, but to be remembered as the one who wasn't afraid to confront the injustices of the system. Darius Bell knew the real work was just beginning. Darius woke early the following day, the weight of the previous day still on his shoulders, but his mind sharp as a knife. He knew that even after everything that had happened, nothing was settled. The fight wasn't won with a single powerful speech or a successful interview. There was much more to do, and every action he took now would shape the future of his company and his own trajectory. He rose, dressed in his suit with his usual care, and looked in the mirror for a moment, absorbing who he had become. As he walked through the office, the atmosphere was different. There was a palpable energy, as if everyone was waiting for his next move. Tasha, sitting at her desk, looked at him with an expression that blended apprehension and expectation. "The investors want an answer," she said, handing him a stack of documents. "They're ready to move forward with the funding, but they want to know what you think about this situation." Darius sighed, sitting down at his desk. He knew this was a crucial moment, a turning point. The investors had their own interests, and it was understandable that they wanted reassurance, whether they were investing in his company or the movement he was generating. They wanted to know if he was a safe bet, or if all this fuss would end up being a risk to business. "Tell them I'm ready to proceed," Darius replied, his voice firm. "But we want more than money. We want a commitment to change, to genuine transformation." Tasha gave a subtle smile and picked up the phone. Darius looked out at the city skyline once more. The challenges ahead were not small, and he knew that Innovis's visibility, now greater than ever, brought with it both opportunities and risks. Competitors were watching closely, and what he had said about the broken system would not be forgotten. Some would try to discredit him, others would use him as an example for their own ends, but he wasn't willing to be just a pawn in others' game. He had a mission now, and it didn't involve following the established rules. Tasha's phone rang, and she began talking to one of the investors. Darius focused on what was happening, but his thoughts were on something more important. He needed to start planning the next steps. He knew he needed to expand faster, reach new markets, but above all, he needed to give visibility to other entrepreneurs who, like him, were on the margins, invisible to the great opportunities. His success shouldn't be an exception, but a rule. When Tasha finished the conversation, she came back to him, placing her phone on the desk. "The funding has been approved," she said with a smile of approval. "They want to invest whatever it takes to make Innovis grow. They're also excited about the visibility you're gaining, but they're worried about the attacks, about the rhetoric surrounding your image. They want to know if you have a plan to mitigate that." Darius gave a short laugh. "They want to mitigate, but I'm not here to mitigate anything," he replied, his voice calmer than it seemed. "I'm not going to hide. The issue is simple. The system needs to change, and if it needs me to be the face of that change, then I will be. I'm not going to apologize for that." He felt a wave of certainty wash over him. Tasha looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. She knew that, however right he was, the pressure would only increase. "You know this is going to require more than just your words, right?" she asked, with a slight hesitation. "They're going to come after you, try to tear down your image in every way possible. This isn't going to be easy. Darius nodded. I know that, Tasha. But that's why we're doing this. It's not just about me. It never was. He looked at her with a slight but serious smile. I'm not doing this to be anyone's hero. I'm doing this to give a voice to those who don't have one. To show that the success of people like me isn't a rarity. I'm not an exception, and that's what needs to be seen. In the following days, the tension only increased. The clip of Darius's interview continued to be shared across all social media platforms, causing a sharper division in public opinion. But at the same time, reactions were many. Some said he was merely trying to victimize himself, that his view of the system was an oversimplification of something far more complex. Others saw him as an inspirational figure, someone finally giving voice to a historically neglected group. The media fueled each of these viewpoints, and the commentary continued to proliferate. Meanwhile, Darius knew he couldn't let this define him. He was used to external judgment, and the threats, while unsettling, were nothing new. What bothered him most was how the system attempted to distort his struggle, trying to turn it into a convenient narrative that could be consumed without question. He didn't want to be just another symbol. He wanted to be the spark that ignited a real and profound conversation about the barriers that existed for people like him. A conversation that wouldn't be stifled by media distractions or the superficiality of conventional narratives. One morning, arriving at the office, Darius found an email containing a proposal from a non-profit organization focused on promoting diversity and inclusion in the technology industries. They were offering a strategic partnership, aiming to help expand diversity initiatives at Innovis. The proposal was interesting, but Darius knew it wasn't a simple solution. The reality that these issues were often dealt with superficially by large organizations didn't fool him. He knew a genuine partnership couldn't be based on marketing or goodwill. It needed to come with concrete actions. Darius read and reread the email before finally composing his reply. He knew that if he truly wanted to change the system, he needed to go beyond words and good intentions. He needed to start thinking about ways to impact the structures that truly mattered, those invisible to most, those silently but effectively perpetuating inequalities. He responded to the email with an invitation to a meeting. Innovation and genuine change demanded constant work, and he was ready for it. The organization's response was positive. They were willing to meet and discuss how they could work together to create a mentorship program for young Black people interested in technology and engineering, something more than just a motivational speaking program, but something real, offering access to the tools, knowledge, and support needed for these young people to truly change their lives and, more importantly, change the system. In the following days, Darius engaged in a series of meetings with other industry leaders, investors, and influential individuals willing to join his cause. He knew this wouldn't be an easy path, but he also knew things were starting to genuinely change. He was beginning to feel the power of his voice, not just as a CEO, but as an advocate for deeper change. The press continued to cover his name, but he no longer cared about the headlines. He knew he was creating something bigger. And every step he took, every move he made, was helping to build the foundation of something that in the future would be bigger than any of us. He was creating a support network, a network of entrepreneurs and professionals who would not just break down barriers, but definitively destroy them. When Tasha entered his office that afternoon, he looked at her with a quiet smile. "What happened?" she asked, noticing his calmness. Darius looked at her, certainty etched on his face. "I'm ready for the next step," he said. "We're only just beginning, Tasha. And now it's time to do this on a much larger scale." The system may have tried to silence him, but Darius knew his voice had finally been heard. And this was only the beginning. He was ready for whatever came next, because deep down he knew that if he wanted to see change happen, he needed to be the change. Darius Bell's journey was far from over, but he was starting to feel that real change was within his grasp. With each step, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. He knew the visibility his story was achieving wasn't an accident. Every debate, every attack, every commendation was serving to deepen a conversation that had always been stifled. But the resistance was strong, and the criticism plentiful. Some people didn't want to see the injustices. They preferred to believe the system was fair, and that those who couldn't reach the top simply weren't trying hard enough. But he knew this was a myth, a comfortable lie that fueled inequality. The following days were intense. Tasha kept him updated on media coverage, but he no longer cared much for the empty commentary. His vision was clearer now, more than ever. He wanted to be a force for real change, to open society's eyes to what was going wrong within the power structures. Innovis wasn't just a company. It was a platform. An opportunity to build something lasting, something that could, over time, impact the lives of many others who were on the margins, waiting for a chance. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. Real change came with collaboration, with the right alliances. And that's where he started to build a circle of allies, investors, other CEOs, foundations already committed to social change, people who, like him, knew the system was broken and that the only way to fix it was to transform it completely. He met with leaders from various sectors, from education to government, to begin planning a future where black people wouldn't have to prove their worth twice, 3 times, just to be treated with the same dignity as their white counterparts. He knew this fight wouldn't be won overnight, but it was a battle worth fighting. At the same time, the threats didn't cease. He continued to receive anonymous messages, some more direct than others, and the pressure only increased. But Darius wasn't afraid. Every attack only strengthened his resolve. He knew nothing and no one could derail him from his purpose. He had been through so much in his life, overcome far greater challenges than this. These attacks, while uncomfortable, were nothing compared to the obstacles he'd faced on his journey to get here. He had become a symbol of resistance, and that wouldn't be erased. The focus of his message began to shift, and he was no longer just the leader of a tech company. He was an advocate for equity. He used his status, his visibility, to demand changes that would benefit not only him, but an entire generation of entrepreneurs who, like him, were ready to challenge the established norms. The world was now seeing that black people, especially in the tech and business industries, weren't just a trend. They were a fundamental part of the future and deserved to be treated with due respect and equality. Innovis began to expand exponentially, but with an even clearer focus, providing real opportunities for marginalized communities. They created mentorship programs, partnerships with historically black colleges and universities, and took direct action to ensure diversity was more than just a slogan. Darius was no longer just creating security and technology solutions. He was creating opportunities, opening doors for those who would otherwise never have access to them. However, the greatest impact wasn't just on the people Innovis hired or the social programs implemented. The greatest impact was on the conversation he was helping to shape. He remained a constant voice, participating in debates, writing articles, giving talks. He knew that change wouldn't come without persistence, and persistence was something he had learned to cultivate throughout his life. With every speech, every interview, he challenged the status quo. He challenged comfortable thinking, the thinking that said the system worked for everyone, because it didn't, and Darius was determined to show the world that. Even those who attacked him began to realize his message couldn't be ignored. They tried to portray him as someone merely playing the victim, but the truth was, Darius was hitting a nerve, making the system confront its flaws, its hypocrisy. The initial resistance began to wane. People started to rethink what they had always taken for granted. He was no longer just a successful CEO. He was an agent of change. He was helping to rewrite the rules of the game, challenging a narrative that had long been considered immutable. Time passed, and Innovis became one of the leading examples of success and diversity in the technology sector. The impact of his actions was remarkable. Darius, with his vision and perseverance, became a role model for many young black entrepreneurs around the world. His story was no longer an exception. It was the rule. Society began to realize that Darius Bell's success had nothing to do with luck or special favors. He was there because he was competent, because he had worked harder than anyone else to get where he was. And that began to inspire other people to believe that their success was also possible, without having to play by the unfair rules of the system. In quieter moments, away from the spotlight, Darius reflected on his journey. He thought about the hardships he faced, the doors slammed in his face, the humiliations he suffered. But he knew that all these experiences had shaped him, had prepared him for what he was doing now. He thought of his parents, his mother, who worked tirelessly to give him the chance to dream bigger. He thought of Birmingham, his humble home, his challenging life, and realized how every step he had taken had in some way been a response to all he had been through. At a dinner with Tasha sometime later, she asked him a question he hadn't expected. "Darius," she said with a gentle smile, "have you ever thought about what it will be like in 10 years? What do you want people to remember about you when they look back on your story?" He thought for a moment. He looked at her, and his answer was simple, yet full of conviction. I want people to look at what we've managed to build and know that it was done with hard work, sweat and tears. But more importantly, I want them to know that it was done with courage. Courage to challenge what's comfortable. Courage to fight for a fairer system. Courage to never give up. The dinner continued with laughter and relaxed conversation. But deep down, Darius knew that what he had started was far from over. He had taken the first step towards a quiet revolution, a revolution that would continue to grow, not by the strength of one man, but by the strength of an idea. And as the world watched him, he knew it wasn't just his story that was being written. It was the story of all those who, like him, never gave up fighting for a better future. And so, over time, Darius Bell's struggle ceased to be merely a personal one, becoming instead a collective fight, a battle that resonated across the globe. For he knew that true success wasn't just achieving one's own goals, but ensuring others had the same opportunities. And that was the legacy he wished to leave.